Welcome back to Old School Sports and another out of the park baseball tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to cover a very important topic because depending on whether you are playing as general manager and manager, general manager only, and or whether you're playing out all of your games yourself or having others make those decisions for you, the decisions you make around your coaching staff can impact the roster and the players that you're actually going to have to work with, the lineups, pitching rotation, and substitution pattern of your players, the decisions being made on the field when the games are being played out, player development in both the minor and the major league levels, which could be even more important in this new OOTP 25 version of the game with the player development lab and the development focuses. Cohesion among your coaching staff is going to influence your clubhouse. It's going to influence injury prevention and recovery, scouting accuracy and scouting finds. And it's also can potentially influence which players are even going to be willing to sign with your team in free agency. And there's probably about 50 other things that are mostly smaller things that I'm not even thinking about that your coaching staff is going to influence as well. So it's an important thing to get right, but because it's not really the nuts and bolts of building a team or playing out the games, it's something that some people just ignore, or it's something that some people are perhaps intimidated by and don't spend as much time on. So today what we're going to try to do is walk through rebuilding a coaching staff, talk about which traits are most important for successful coaches. And if you go through something similar to this when you're starting a new game, as I am today with the Cleveland Guardians, I think it's going to likely set you up for a lot more success over the days and weeks and months that you'll likely be playing the game that you're starting. So to get a look at your coaching staff, you go to the Personnel tab, and there's a ton of different major league coaches, scouts, and trainers. And then you also have managers, pitching coaches, and hitting coaches for all of your minor league teams as well. And you can see we've got some vacancies from the start that we're going to need to fill at the lowest levels of our minor league system. But we're going to start by talking about the major league team. The one position that you probably don't need to care about very much is assistant general manager. If you play a game as GM or GM/manager, the team's previous GM will slide into that assistant GM role. Basically, from what I can tell over years of playing this game, the primary thing that the assistant GM is they give you some advice when you're considering making a trade with another team. Historically, I've found that advice to be pretty bad, so I don't put a lot of value on it. So that is probably the one position that you may not need to think about very much. And while you're building your major league coaching staff, you can go over here and you click on the staff roles, and this essentially will tell you how cohesive and happy the coaching staff overall is. And you can see here in Cleveland, we're in the middle of the pack. We're content. What you want to ultimately do on this screen is try to get as many personalities who work well with one another and try to get as few personalities that struggle with one another. And if you do that, all else being equal, your staff cohesion will be better, and that will flow through to other aspects of the game. In general, of course, you want better player relationships for your coaches and staff than worse. And the other thing that you'll be working on in this staff role screen is at the major league level how you're teaching catchers, infielders, outfielders, and running. And you can ask AI to set those roles, and they'll default. And you can see here we've got good coaching of catchers, average of infielders, good coaching of outfielders, and average of teaching running. kind of interesting that Sandy Alomar Jr. is only viewed as a average coach of catching. I would have assumed he would be pretty good in that regard. But regardless, this will influence how your players' defensive traits either improve, maintain, or decline. And also how good your players are potentially at running. So taking a look at the cohesion here, you can see we've got a lot of people who struggle with people with normal personalities. Our hitting coach, our first base coach, and our third coach all struggle with people with normal personalities. Now, as it turns out, our manager and our bench coach both have normal personalities. But if we decide that there's some coaches that we want to move on from, thinking about the personalities of the new coaches we bring on board and trying to build a more cohesive staff is certainly something important to do. First thing we'll do is take a look at our manager, Stephen Vogt. And he's got pretty solid ratings. Three of the more important things for managers are how they handle development, influence mechanics, and handle aging. They're going to have an influence on all of the players on your team. Those are the three traits I care about the most. So in a perfect world, you'd probably want someone who's better with development, but to be quite honest, by the time players are in the majors, hopefully their development is largely done. So the fact that he's outstanding with mechanics is pretty important, because if your players are completely developed, mechanics is the aspect of the game by which they may unlock some potential that previously your scouts hadn't seen. And then he's also excellent at handling aging, which, being a major league manager who's ultimately going to have some older players, is important as well. In the lower levels of your minor league system, it doesn't really matter all that much how your manager is at handling aging, because they're generally going to be dealing with teenagers and players in their early 20s. Relationships are another important thing to think about here. You can see here Stephen Vogt's got average relationships with the Guardians players, but he doesn't have fair or poor relationships with anybody. So although it's kind of average overall, I'd say it's average with a positive direction on it. So pretty good relationships there for Vogt. And while I think you ultimately want to have as good relationships as possible, in some cases, areas where it's really important are some of your hitting coaches and pitching coaches. If you have a hitting coach or a pitching coach who happens to have a poor relationship with one of the key players on your team or in your organization, that can definitely slow the pace of development, particularly for the younger players. So certainly something to keep in mind. But Vogt here certainly looks like a solid choice as a manager starting his first year in the Guardians organization. So probably nothing that we're going to need to do there. So knowing that we're going to keep that normal personality around, that may mean that if I don't like the hitting coach or the first or third base coaches, that may be somebody to move on from. Bench coach is almost your assistant manager, and here you see we've got someone that we're likely to move on from. Craig Albernaz, poor with development, poor with mechanics, and poor with handling aging. Like the manager, your bench coach is going to have an influence on all of the players on your major league team. Now, Albernaz is good at teaching catching, infield, and outfield defense, and average at teaching running. But I would never, if I had a choice in the matter, have someone who's poor at all three of those aspects on my major league team or any other team for that matter. He's got average relationships, but a number of them are fair and some of them are poor as well. There's no negatives as far as his relationships with people, but we are going to go ahead and fire Mr. Albernaz right now, just to kind of put the context of the amount that it's going to cost us into context, right now we've got about $25 million available as we start this process. We're going to be spending some money on cleaning up our coaching staff rather than signing players, which isn't great. But given how important this is for all of the reasons that I outlined at the start of the episode, I think it still makes sense. So we are going to go ahead as fire our bench coach. So we've got one opening on the team now. You can see our assistant GM. One other thing they will do is make recommendations. Generally don't find these incredibly useful, but we'll talk about how to hire people later. And without a bench coach, the AI not able to pick between the bench, first base, and third base coach. So we'll get back to teaching roles at the end. Our pitching coach is Carl Willis, and he's another guy who, although he is good at teaching pitching, he's poor in development and mechanics and handling aging. When I think about pitching and hitting coaches, handling development, handling mechanics, and then how they do it, either teaching, pitching, or hitting, are the things that I care about this most. Although, as I noted earlier, you can argue that development is a little less important in the majors because the players should be largely developed. Someone who's also poor at mechanics, poor with aging, and is only good at teaching pitching is not really someone who I want. He does have good relationships, so that will be a little harder to replace. But Carl Willis is also someone who struggles with personable personalities, which, given that he has a personable personality himself, is a little weird. But we're going to go ahead and remove Willis as well, fire him. And you can see we're going to have a lot of work to do to fix this coaching staff. And you can see by buying out those guys from their contracts, we've already spent $1.5 million. So this is not going to be a cheap thing to do, but it's ultimately going to be pretty important to us. Our hitting coach, Chris Valaika, oh God, this coaching staff is brutal. Only average at teaching hitting, also poor at development, poor mechanics, poor with aging. He's another guy who does have good relationships. 3 years, $270,000 a year, so it's going to be another $800,000 that we're spending to get rid of him. But if we're in for a dime, we're in for a dollar. So we're going to go ahead and fire him as well. So we are going to be completely rebuilding this pitching staff. But I think when things are done, it's going to be a much better pitching staff than it was today. If you are a team that doesn't have a lot of money, this is something where you may need to be a little more strategic in the pace of the firings. With the amount of money we have with the Guardians, $25 million, we're going to end up spending a pretty good chunk of it, but we are going to be able to completely turn over this pitching staff and make it much better. But it is something that you may want to do over a couple of seasons rather than just in one fell swoop as I'm doing it myself, especially if you have people who are a little more borderline. The pitching and hitting coaches who were both poor with development and mechanics and aging were really not ideal. First base coach is Sandy Alomar Jr., and the base coaches are going to be most important for in-game running, where he's good, and then the teaching aspects that we talked about earlier of catching, infield and outfield defense, and running. So he is solid in those things, but he's not incredible. And he does have good development, good mechanics, good at handling aging, and he's also got good relationships with the team. So I think I am actually inclined with a guy like Sandy Alomar Jr., that good development, good mechanics, and good with aging are really the traits that we would want in a manager or a bench coach. And since He's only average in 3 of the 5 things we care about for a base coach, and it's also going to be less expensive to hire a new base coach than it is going to be to hire a new bench coach. I'm considering promoting him to bench coach. Depending on whether you are playing as a GM or a manager, these strategy settings and these managing attributes also are going to be something that you're going to want to pay attention to and think about. It's kind of beyond the scope of this episode because I don't want this episode to be 3 hours long. Alomar, I don't love that he does struggle with those normal personalities. That would be the only reason I'd be perhaps reticent about potentially promoting him to bench coach, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. Rouglis Odor is not really that great. He is a third base coach. He's fair at in-game running, catching, infield, and outfield defense, average at teaching running. He doesn't really have ratings that I want to promote him into another position. He's a guy with good relationships. It seems like that's what the Cleveland coaching staff is built upon, people with good relationships who get along well with one another. But we're going to go ahead and fire him as well. So we are opening up a ton of spots on this major league team. Scouting director is Scott Barnsby. Average in the majors and international, good in the minors. He does highly favor ability. I think it's been well documented that many people prefer scouts who are not highly favor ability and are actually highly favor tools. And I generally prefer a scout, if at all possible, to be good at everything. And I also do trend towards highly favor tools. So we're actually going to scan Barnsby as well. We are just decimating this Cleveland Indians staff. Last but hopefully not least is our trainer, James Quinlan. And he's actually respectable. He's average or good at everything. You can see the 2 primary traits for a trainer are rehabbing the different types of injuries, preventing the different types of injuries, and then I guess the third aspect is fatigue recovery, where he is good. Since we're basically ripping this entire pitching or coaching staff apart, I'm going to fire Quinlan as well. He's borderline keepable. Honestly, the scouting director was fine too, but we're going to go all in on this. So moving back to our team trainer now, where we've got a vacancy in the scouting and the training vacancies are going to be the most easy to potentially fill because there's only a few things that you care about. To me, one of the things that I probably care about the most in terms of my trainers is fatigue recovery and preventing arm injuries. Those are the 2 aspects that I care about the most. And you can see right here at the beginning of the game, the OOTP legend, Rick Jameson, who's pretty much good, excellent, outstanding, or legendary at everything, is available. The only thing, and it's less important with trainers and scouts, but you will want to look at the personality. An easy way to see it, since I'm in commissioner mode right now here, is to just go in there and look, and you can see he's personable, works well with controlling people, and he works negatively with personable people. But he's also just an incredible trainer. So we're going to make an offer to him. But you can see there's a lot of good guys out there who don't have any weaknesses. When I think about hiring a trainer, I want to minimize and hopefully have nothing that they're fair or poor at. If I've got these green and blue colors across the line, sometimes you can't ask for much better than that. In this case, we've got the OOTP legend out there. So we're going to engage with Mr. Jameson, offer him a contract. Says he wants $650,000 over 5 years. Hopefully we'll be able to get him for a little less than that. But honestly, I just want to get all these guys signed, so I'm not going. No, I want to be prudent about it. So we'll offer him $550,000 a year for 5 years. Submit that offer to Jameson. And when we go back to our personnel screen, we'll see that we've got a pending offer there. Scouting director. We're going to look at our scout ratings, people with a preferred occupation at scouting director. All personnel, although that's really more applicable for the coaches. And I generally try to look for somebody who's best at scouting international people. That's an area of the game where there will be random scouting fines. And international amateur free agency is also a huge part of the game. There's also international free agents. And then amateurs are clearly important as well for the players that you'll be drafting every year. So I want people who are good at everything, but if there's 2 ratings I care about most, it's scouting international and scouting amateurs. To some extent, the majors and the minors, while still important, you're going to have stats for those players, which, while not something you should necessarily rely on 100%, are going to give you a pretty good clue as to how this player might actually be rated and performing. So we're going to go for a highly favored tool scout here, and you can see R.J. Harrison. He's good in the majors, excellent in the minors, international, and amateurs. Highly favored tool scout. Taking a look at his personality, he's personable. He likes personable people, struggles with those who have a normal personality. But you have to keep in mind that your scout is going to be on the road a lot of the time. So I think that relationship is somewhat less important. We want the best scout possible since he's going to be on the road and looking at people. And you can see scouting directors are pretty expensive. We're going to try to cut that down to $1 million a year for 5 years. Submit that offer to R.J. Harrison. And another one bites the dust as far as the vacant positions for us. So the manager's right-hand man is going to be our bench coach. So that is the next position that we're going to look for. We're going to look for people who are interested in all coach ratings. If we click on all personnel here to include minor leaguers, that'll increase the opportunity set. With the bench coaches, development, mechanics, and handling aging are important. But keep in mind that they are also involved in teaching, catching, infield, outfield, and running, as well as, actually that's all there in the in-game running goes with the base coaches. So you're going to want someone who is pretty good at a lot of different things. And there's some pretty high-end coaches to consider here. If you look at the job, this is the current job of the player. Actually, it's their preferred job. It says current job there, but their normal role, you can see for Joe Madden, is a manager. Doesn't mean that someone who has manager listed here won't consider taking a bench coach job, but probably a little more difficult to get them to take that role. Guy that I'm really liking is Matthew Johnson. Now he's 68 years old, so he's probably not going to be around for the long term, but he pretty much checks all the boxes for us. He's excellent with development, mechanics, outstanding at handling aging, and he's also excellent at teaching, catching the infield and outfield. So he's a guy who can help us in a lot of ways. His personality is controlling. He works well with personable people, and he struggles with controlling people. So we're going to want to keep that in mind. Again, we don't have a ton of guys on the staff right now. We've got a personable guy and a couple of normal guys on the staff. We may end up, if personable ends up being an issue, we could just fire the assistant GN Chernoff as well It'll cost us a lot more money, but it could prevent some issues potentially in the clubhouse. Johnson, though, actually works well with personable people. He just struggles with controlling people. We don't have any of them on the team right now. His relationships are expected to be good. So he's really a perfect candidate for a bench coach. So I think we're going to try to bring him on board. Now, again, at age 68, he's probably not going to be around for too many years. We're only going to offer him the 3-year deal that he's looking for. He may not even make it through that. But he'll be potentially a really nice addition to our team. We do need to kind of consider now that that controlling personality of his is something that we don't see on the screen here, and we're going to want to factor it in when we think about signing additional people. Pitching coach, generally you're probably going to see most of the guys who are very good at teaching pitching want to be pitching coaches or want to be managers. As we talked about, the things we care about here are how good they're teaching at pitching, and then how good they are with development mechanics, and probably to a lesser extent aging. John Farrell certainly jumps off the page here, legendary at teaching pitching, outstanding with development mechanics and aging. He is a former Cleveland Indian from back in the day. Expected to have good relationships. Easygoing personality. He works well with normal people. He does struggle with personable people. But our manager has a normal personality, so that'll be positive for the two of them to work well together. So I think that John Farrell is a pretty high-end coach to potentially bring on as our pitching coach. So we'll make an offer to Mr. Farrell as well. And if you're ever doing this and you want to see all the offers you've made, you can go back to the staff roles tab, and that'll give you a kind of summary of the offers that you have outstanding. And you can see we've got some positive personality things going on here, but also some negative ones. That personable Mike Chernoff and the potentially personable trainer in Scout. There's some issues potentially there. RJ Harrison, the Scout, struggles with those normal guys, but we're keeping the normal guys in place now. Sandy Alomar could end up losing his job, which is sad for a Indian/Guardian legend. But those are the tough decisions we have to make as the general manager. Hitting coach, basically looking for the exact same things as you are with a pitching coach, except clearly you care more about teaching hitting than teaching pitching. And there's some really good candidates here as well. Ben Johnson is always a pretty good pitching coach or hitting coach that it seems like I end up with a lot. He's young, so you can have him potentially in your system for a long time. Outstanding at teaching hitting, outstanding with development, excellent with mechanics and aging. He's personable. He works well with normal. He struggles with temperamental. We don't have any temperamental people on the team right now, so that's good. And he's another guy who's expected to have good relationships. So Ben Johnson, I think, is a great guy to try to add to this pitching staff. Also not looking for a ton of money. So we're going to offer him 5 years, $250,000 a year to bring him on board as well. And our base coach is the next option that we're going to want to think about. Now, keep in mind the bench coach that we've offered to Matthew Johnson. If he's on board, the only thing he's not really awesome at teaching is running. So finding someone who's good at teaching at running for this third base coach may be important. And if there's a couple of third base coaches that we like that have some good personality traits out there, that may mean that Sandy Alomar Jr. also gets fired. So with the base coaches, in-game running is going to be reasonably important since they're making a lot of those decisions. And then you're going to want to find someone who's also good at teaching catching, infield, outfield, and teaching running. So there's some interesting options here. Jeff Fry certainly stands out. Outstanding at in-game running, legendary with catching in the outfield, excellent at teaching running, so that would be an upgrade from our potential bench coach. He's normal personality, works well with personable. He struggles with easygoing. So when we go back here to our staff roles, we are thinking about bringing on one easygoing guy in John Farrell. So that's not perfect, but it's not necessarily the end of the world. And Jeff Fry only expected to have average relationships, but you can't necessarily get everything perfect. So we are going to go ahead and we're going to offer a contract to Jeff Fry as well. The first base and the third base coaches are generally the lowest paid coaches on your major league staff in OOTP. And now we are in a situation where we've got offers out for all of these positions. I think what I'm going to do now is we're going to kind of have Sandy Alomar Jr. in limbo for a while. We're going to see who we can actually get signed, because there's no guarantees that we'll get all of these guys signed. And then based on what the coaching staff looks like in about a week or so, when we've hopefully filled all 6 of those spots, we'll ultimately make a decision whether we should move on from Alomar or not. It does seem like there are a fair amount of capable base coaches out there. Now that could change in the coming week as other teams sign coaches. But right now, when you look at the quality of the people that we've made offers to, compared to, in some cases, the extreme lack of quality in the ratings of the coaches who were on our team when we started this process, you can understand why, with all of the different things that coaching can impact, why it's worth spending a little time on this at the beginning of any game. Similarly, if I were really going to play this out, I would be going down into my minor league teams and doing the same type of decision making. When you're thinking about your pitching and hitting coaches in particular, the other thing to think about with your pitching and hitting coaches is what their focus is. This pitching coach is focused on power pitchers. This hitting coach on the same team is focused on contact. So there will be players that they are better at working with, and you can actually see that right here when we look at type, which would help you. So you can see that in the Cleveland organization right now, we've got a load of hitting coaches who are good at working on contact, and we've also got several power pitcher-oriented pitching coaches, and one finesse-focused pitching coach. So there's multiple thoughts on this. Some people in the minors like to have, we're going to build an organization of power pitchers, and I want as many coaches as possible to focus on that. We're going to build an organization of contact hitters, and I want many hitting coaches as possible to focus on that. I think it's already tricky enough to find players in international amateur free agency and the draft that I want on my team, period, who have the personality traits and the potential that I'm looking for. So when I'm building a minor league system, generally I try to kind of be a little more balanced. Have a couple people focused on power pitchers, have a couple people focused on finesse pitchers, have a couple hitting coaches focused on power hitters and contact hitters, etc. And then if I have a power pitcher who has a great relationship with, say, Owen Dew, for instance, maybe I promote that pitcher to AAA a little early so he gets a little extra time in terms of his development with a pitch that's well suited to work with him. Just one other thing to think about, particularly in the minor leagues when you're going to be doing a lot of development of these players. The coach relationships are important, the coach skills are important, and then the specialty areas of the pitching and hitting coaches are also important to think about. But we're going to sim ahead a few days, hopefully is all it will take now, and see if we can bring on board some new coaches. So we've simmed ahead a few days, and we have hired all of the coaches that we tried to. So that was very positive. And now when we look at relationships here, you can see it's a lot more going on. Everybody works well with somebody, but there's also a fair amount of people that struggle with relationships. Given that Sandy Alomar Jr. doesn't work well with that normal personality, and our manager and our third base coach, Jeff Fry, both have that normal personality, and given that Sandy Alomar Jr. is kind of only average at a lot of the important aspects of his job, we are going to go ahead and can him as well and try to bring in someone who's better at the aspects of the job, but who also is going to have some works well positive personality traits and is not going to struggle with anybody to potentially ultimately give us a little bit of a bump to that potential team staff cohesion, not team cohesion. So Sandy Alomar Jr. is canned as well. It looks like Vogt is the only one who has survived. And looking at our staff now, you can see we've got a lot of personable people on our team, a couple normal people, and we don't have anyone who's temperamental. So in a perfect world, if we can find a quality first base coach who works well with personable people and who struggles with temperamental people, that would kind of be the perfect fit for this spot that we have here. And it took a little while for me going down the matrix here, looking for people that were good at teaching catching, infield, outfield, teaching running and in-game running. And then when I kind of clicked in on those guys, finding someone with the right personality traits to be the perfect fit for us. But we have found that person, and it is Nick Jackson. He's 44 years old. He wants to be a hitting coach. Legendary at teaching catching, outstanding at teaching the outfield and running, excellent teaching the infield, excellent at in-game running. And he's got a personality that will be very good for the group that we have here. He's personable, works well with normal personalities, struggles with temperamental, and he also will happen to have good relationships with the Guardians players. So I think that he's going to be a great addition to our team in the coaching meetings, and then also with what he brings as far as his actual coaching skills. So we'll go ahead and offer him a deal, $175,000, try to bring him in for 5 years, submit an offer to him, and we'll see if we can get him locked up before the season gets underway. And Nick Jackson has signed with us, so we have completely revamped our coaching staff at this point. Taking a look at the staff roles here, you can see by moving on from Sandy Alomar Jr. there. We've still got a fair amount of people who struggle with each other relationship-wise, but as I said, everyone has somebody that they work well with, and in many cases, multiple people that they work well with. And there are now 3 people on the staff that don't have problems with anybody in our newly acquired bench coach, hitting coach, and first base coach. So it's still listed as content right now. I think over time, as the season begins and these players, coaches start working together, it'll adjust a bit. I think on balance, it'll probably be a little higher. Going back to the teaching roles, you can see here we now have a much higher level of coaching in our organization. A legendary coach of catchers, excellent teaching the infield, legendary teaching the outfield, and outstanding at teaching running. So that will help on the margins. And then the higher quality of the coaches that we have here. You know, remember our pitching coach and our hitting coach before were pretty much poor at everything. Now with John Farrell, he's legendary at teaching pitching and outstanding at everything we care about. Similarly, Ben Johnson, not quite to the same level, but he's outstanding teaching hitting, and then outstanding or excellent with development, mechanics, and aging. So it's taken a little while. It's taken some time. It's taking some, I don't want to say mind numbing work, but it's a little tedious to go through that spreadsheet and back and forth. But now we've set up this organization at the major league level. So on the margins, when your coaching staff and its ability come into play, whether it's with development, whether it's with an in-game decision as to whether to send a runner or not, whether it's regards to will a minor injury linger and become a major injury, whether it's the accuracy of our scouting report on the players that we're potentially going to be drafting in a few months. All of those little things we've now made better with this little bit of work. And if we go through the exact same exercise in our minor league systems, we're going to end up helping all of those random dice rolls by the computer that ultimately will determine success or failure, and putting a better coaching staff in the minors while we're developing all of the young talent in our system is going to, on the margin, continue to move the potential outcomes slightly in our favor by bringing on a better coaching staff. So I know it's not the most exciting way to start a game, but I think it is something that's important. And I think when you look at the quality of the coaches that we brought along into the system compared to what we had before, we're clearly a much higher quality coaching staff. And even with the fact that we literally fired everyone on the major league coaching staff except for the assistant GM and the manager, when all was said and done, it cost us less than $10 million. So it certainly wasn't cheap, but when you think about the impact that this great coaching staff can have on our organization for years, and in some cases, some of these coaches will hopefully be around for decades, I think it's an investment that's well worth your time and well worth the $5 or $10 million that you might be spending at the start of the game buying some of those coaches out of their contracts. And with that, we're done. If you've got other ideas on what you do at the beginning of the game when thinking about a coaching staff, or there's different aspects of the coaches that you like to hire or don't like to hire that perhaps I didn't cover or forgot to cover or don't know to cover, would love to hear those kind of pieces of information down in the comments below. They'd be useful to me, and I'm sure they'll be useful to our viewers as well. Until our next tutorial, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.